There is one detail in the disappearance of Fiona Pender that changes the way I look at this entire case. Not the searches, not the rumors, not the theories about where her remains could be. It is something much simpler. The last confirmed place Fiona Pender was seen alive was not a road. It was not a bus station. It was not a shop. It was not somebody's car. It was inside her own flat at approximately 6 in the morning. And once you understand that, a very uncomfortable question appears. Did Fiona Pender ever actually walk out of that flat on her own? Because if the answer is no, then almost every theory about what happened afterward begins in the wrong place. Fiona was 25 years old. She lived in a flat on Church Street in Tullamore, County Offaly. She was 7 months pregnant. On the morning of the 23rd of August 1996, Fiona was last known to have been seen at approximately 6 in the morning inside that flat. After that, the confirmed trail ends. No confirmed sighting of Fiona walking away from Church Street. No confirmed sighting of her boarding public transport. No confirmed sighting establishing that she traveled somewhere else. No confirmed sighting showing her beginning a new life. Fiona simply disappeared. 30 years later, her body has never been found. 5 people have been arrested during the investigation. Thousands of documents and reports have been collected. More than 300 statements have been taken. Extensive searches have been carried out. And nobody has been brought to justice for Fiona's disappearance and murder. The guards now officially investigate her disappearance as murder. So today, I do not want to try to identify a killer. We cannot do that from the public evidence. Instead, I want to answer something narrower. Something we can actually test. What is the most logical explanation for what happened immediately after that final confirmed sighting? There are several possibilities. Fiona could have deliberately disappeared. She could have left the flat alone and encountered a stranger. She could have left willingly with somebody she knew. Or the critical event could have begun inside or immediately around the place where she was last confirmed alive. One of those explanations requires far fewer assumptions than the others. So let us go through them one by one. First, Fiona deliberately disappeared. At the beginning of almost any disappearance, this possibility has to be considered. Adults can leave. They can decide not to tell their families where they are going. They can begin new lives. And sometimes circumstances that look sinister at first turn out to have another explanation. So could Fiona have simply walked away? There is a major problem with that theory. Investigators spent years looking for a reason. Former Operation Trace Coordinator Alan Bailey has explained that in missing person investigations, investigators look for what he described as a push or pull factor. Something pushing the person away from their existing life, or something pulling them toward another one. But in Fiona's case, he said investigators never established a reason for her to leave. That does not mathematically prove she could not have left voluntarily. But consider what the theory asks us to accept. A woman who is 7 months pregnant deliberately disappears. She successfully avoids creating the confirmed trail afterward. She remains hidden for decades. Her body is never located. And eventually, after reviewing the information gathered during the investigation, the guards formally classify the case as murder. For voluntary disappearance to work, we have to explain all of that. And we still need an actual reason for Fiona to have wanted to vanish. Investigators say they never found one. So for me, this is the weakest major theory. Fiona voluntarily disappearing is possible in the most technical sense. But possibility is not the same as probability. The second theory is very different. Fiona leaves the flat normally. She walks out onto Church Street. And somewhere after that, she encounters a stranger. This is the type of explanation people often imagine when somebody suddenly disappears. the person leaves home, something unexpected happens outside. A stranger sees an opportunity, and the victim is gone before anyone understands that something is wrong. Could that have happened to Fiona? Yes. But again, there is a problem. We are adding an entire invisible journey to the story. Remember what we actually know. The last known sighting is inside Fiona's flat at approximately 6 a.m. For the stranger theory to work, Fiona must then leave the building, travel some distance, encounter somebody unknown to her, and disappear. Maybe that journey was only a short one. Maybe it lasted minutes. But we still do not have a confirmed public sighting showing that it happened. And there is another important issue. Operation Trace was created partly to examine whether several disappearances of women in Ireland could have been connected. That is where the famous idea of a common predator became part of the public conversation around these cases. But Alan Bailey has said something particularly important about Fiona. He said investigators became satisfied, especially in Fiona's case, that whoever was responsible was known to her. That does not identify a person. It does not prove exactly what happened. But it is significant, because the random stranger theory requires us to go in the opposite direction from the assessment described by someone deeply involved in reviewing the case. It requires Fiona to leave the place where she was last confirmed alive, begin an undocumented journey, encounter an unknown person, and then become the victim of that stranger. There is no public evidence that allows us to rule it out completely. But compared with the alternatives, it requires several things to happen for which we have no confirmed evidence. So I would place the stranger theory above voluntary disappearance, but still relatively low. Then we reach the third possibility. Fiona left the flat, but she did not leave alone in the way people imagine. She left with somebody she knew. This changes everything, because leaving with someone you know does not require Fiona to have been planning to disappear. She could have expected to come back. She could have agreed to go somewhere. She could have accepted a lift. She could have trusted the person completely. Nothing about leaving with someone familiar automatically looks dangerous. And if investigators believed the person responsible was known to Fiona, this explanation deserves serious attention. Think about how different that would look from a stranger abduction. There does not have to be a struggle on the street. There does not have to be someone forcing Fiona into a vehicle. There does not have to be a witness seeing something obviously wrong. Fiona simply walks out with someone she knows. To anybody watching from a distance, there may be nothing memorable about it. This theory also answers one major problem with the random stranger explanation. Why was Fiona apparently able to disappear without leaving a confirmed trail after Church Street? Because if she entered a vehicle with somebody she trusted, the visible part of the journey could have ended almost immediately. But we still have a problem. There is no confirmed public sighting that proves Fiona walked out with anybody. We can construct the scenario. It fits some of what investigators have said, but we cannot demonstrate that it happened. So, the theory remains plausible, strong but unproven. And that brings us to the fourth possibility. The one I think deserves more attention than it usually receives. What if the disappearance did not begin somewhere Fiona went? What if it began at the place where we know she already was? Church Street. This does not necessarily mean Fiona was killed inside the flat. There is no public evidence proving that. It could mean inside the building, outside the building, immediately after leaving, or during an interaction connected directly with that location. The important distinction is this. Instead of assuming Fiona successfully began a normal journey and then disappeared somewhere along the way, we keep the investigation anchored to the final confirmed evidence. She was inside the flat. Then we lose her. That sounds almost too simple. But when analyzing an unsolved case, simplicity matters. Every time we add an event that is not supported by confirmed evidence, we are making an assumption. Fiona walks down the street. Assumption. Fiona reaches another part of town. Assumption. Fiona meets a stranger. Another assumption. Fiona gets into an unknown vehicle somewhere else. Another assumption. None of those things are impossible. But none of them are required if whatever happened was connected to Church Street itself. And this is why the wording of the latest appeal from the guards caught my attention. 30 years after Fiona disappeared, they are still asking specifically for anyone who met or saw Fiona in the early morning of that Friday to come forward. The final hours matter. The earliest part of the disappearance matters. Because somewhere between the last confirmed sighting and the first moment Fiona should have been seen again, something happened. There have also been extensive searches over the years. In 2025, investigators searched locations in County Offaly and the Slieve Blue Mountains in County Louth. The results of those searches were not publicly released for operational reasons. Those searches tell us the investigation is active. They do not tell us what happened inside the flat. And they do not prove any particular theory. That distinction is important. The search location is not proof of where crime happened. The place where investigators believe remains could potentially be located is not necessarily the same place where a person died. Those are two completely different questions, and confusing them can send us down the wrong path. Where is Fiona? And where did Fiona's disappearance begin? The answers could be separated by many miles. That is why I keep returning to Church Street. Now consider the famous idea that Fiona could have been part of a wider pattern involving missing women in Ireland. It is an understandable theory. Several cases involving women who disappeared became grouped together in public discussion. People naturally searched for connections. Could there have been one predator moving between victims? Could Fiona have encountered the same person responsible for another disappearance? It is a frightening possibility. But when we look specifically at Fiona, the theory becomes weaker. Operation Trace was created to examine exactly that kind of possible connection. And according to its former coordinator, investigators became satisfied that in Fiona's case, whoever was responsible was someone known to her. Again, that is not a conviction. It is not proof against any named individual. Nobody should be accused on the basis of theories. But when deciding which general explanation is most logical, it matters. A random serial predator requires Fiona to encounter someone outside her trusted circle. The known person explanation does not. And the known person explanation fits another strange feature of this case: the lack of a confirmed public trail after the flat. Imagine two different scenarios. In the first, Fiona leaves alone. She walks through Tullamore. She moves through public space. Eventually, she encounters danger. There are multiple opportunities for somebody to see her. Now imagine the second. Fiona interacts with somebody she already knows at or near Church Street. She gets into a vehicle, or goes somewhere with that person. Her independent public journey could last almost no time at all. Which scenario requires fewer unexplained events? The second. But there is still one final question. Can we see Fiona never walked out of the flat? No. That would go beyond the evidence. And that is where I think many true crime discussions make a mistake. A theory becomes convincing, and suddenly people start speaking about it as though it has been proven. We cannot do that here. Fiona could have walked out. She could have left alone. She could have left with someone. Something could have happened inside. Something could have happened just outside. The public evidence does not allow us to choose one exact physical sequence with certainty. but it does allow us to narrow the possibilities. Voluntary disappearance requires a motive investigators say they never established, followed by 30 years without Fiona being found. Weak. A random stranger requires Fiona to begin an undocumented journey after the final confirmed sighting and then encounter someone unknown to her, despite investigators later believing the person responsible was known to her. Possible, but weaker. Fiona willingly leaving with somebody she knew requires fewer assumptions and fits the assessment that the person responsible was familiar to her. Strong. And the possibility that whatever happened began in or immediately around Church Street requires the fewest assumptions of all. Because Church Street is not speculation, it is where the confirmed evidence ends. That does not mean the answer is definitely inside the flat. The stronger conclusion is more careful. There is no confirmed public evidence showing Fiona Pender independently walking away from Church Street after that final sighting. And until evidence establishes that journey, we should be cautious about building theories that depend on it. For almost 30 years, people have asked where Fiona went. Maybe the better question is not where she went. Maybe it is whether she ever got the chance to go anywhere at all. Tomorrow marks 30 years since Fiona disappeared. 30 years since she was last known to be inside that flat. 30 years of searches. 30 years of statements. 30 years without her remains being returned to her family. And the guards are still asking people who know something to speak. 5 people have been arrested during the investigation. Nobody has been brought to justice. So we cannot solve Fiona Pender's murder from the outside, but we can recognize where the evidence is strongest. The story does not begin in the Sleeve Bloom Mountains. It does not begin with a mysterious stranger on some unknown road, and it does not begin with the assumption that Fiona chose to vanish. The evidence takes us back to one place, a flat on Church Street. Approximately 6 in the morning. The last place Fiona Pender was known to be alive. And until someone can establish what happened after that moment, the question remains. Did Fiona Pender walk out of that flat on her own? Or have we spent 30 years asking where she went when the real mystery began before she ever got there?